Good morning, everybody. Well, I'm Tim, as Lindsay said, executive pastor here. This is the second and final week of a little mini-series we're doing. Last week, we talked about giving and why we give and giving gratefully. And today, we're talking about giving strategically. So, super excited to be here. Second, final week in this mini-series. I want to start off by asking, anybody in the room like to play games? Any board game players? Video game players? Anybody like to play mobile games? Okay, a few of you. Now, I'm going to ask you a question. I'm going to count to 3. And I want you to yell out what your favorite game is. Even if you're not the kind of person who usually participates in these kind of things, I'm going to count to 3. I want you to yell it out loud. All right? 1, 2, 3.
Settlers.
2 people said there's a couple Monopoly, some things I had never heard of. Okay, all right, good. Now, who yelled out a strategy game? We got any strategy game fans in the house? All right, a bunch of you guys. Okay, I'm also a strategy game fan. I love them. Now, those of you who like it, why do we like strategy games? I'll tell you, and the reason I would like it is because, look, there's an objective, right? In order to win, we've got to use whatever we have, whatever it may be. It's limited, right? The limited time, the limited resources, the limited game pieces, whichever game you're playing. We've got to use that creatively, strategically, to win, right? That's why I love it. I love that every game's a little bit different. There's all these different types of strategies you can choose and such forth. Love it. Now, listen, I have no idea what Jesus' favorite game was, right? Does anybody in the room know what Jesus' favorite game was? I have no idea. Ben, maybe. But I have no idea what that is. But I do know Jesus has told us a lot about strategy. And that's what we're going to look at today. We're going to be talking, our main passage for today is going to be Luke chapter 16. In fact, we're about to read from that. If you need a Bible, will you raise your hand? We've got volunteers who are passing out the Bibles. You may not be able to see them, but they can see your hand. You can have this Bible. If you need it, please take that home with you. For the rest of you, we're going to be in Luke chapter 16, verses 10. And if you're receiving a gift Bible, it's page 569. Should also be on the screen here so everybody can see it. When you get there, will you go ahead and stand with me as we read God's Word? Luke chapter 16, beginning in verse 10. The one who is faithful in a very little is also faithful in much. And one who is dishonest in a very little is also dishonest in much. If then you have not been faithful in the unrighteous wealth, who will entrust you the true riches? And if you have not been faithful in that which is another's, who will give you that which is your own? No servant can serve 2 masters, for he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. Go ahead and have a seat. Thank you. Look, from this passage, I want us to see 3 things today. First, Jesus is giving us a new perspective on money. Second thing I want us to see is that we are stewards of what God has blessed us with. And the third thing is that the decisions we make in this life, they matter. They matter. Let's jump right into the first point, that Jesus gives us a new perspective on our money. Read with me, verse 11. If then you have not been faithful in the unrighteous wealth, who will entrust you to the true riches? Now, we know that when Jesus is saying these things, he's speaking to a group of Pharisees who are lovers of money. It's actually what verse 14 says, if you see there. And it also talks about the Pharisees being lovers of money in other areas of the New Testament. And so when Jesus is saying this, he's dropping a bombshell. He's stepping on some major toes. You see here in verse 11, Jesus is using a couple terms that would have been confusing perhaps for the Pharisees. He's using the term unrighteous wealth. And he's contrasting that as something different than the true riches. Now, you can imagine what the Pharisees were thinking as they heard this. Jesus, what are you talking about, unrighteous wealth? What do you mean by that? But you see, we know that the Pharisees were lovers of money. They worshipped money. They thought, if we can use the analogy of the strategy game, they thought the point of the game was to accumulate money and to hoard it and to spend it on themselves. But Jesus is saying, no. That was never the point. Wealth is a tool. It's a resource we have. And what Jesus is calling us to is true riches. And true riches is different than money. You see, that would be very confusing for them. You see, many times People use money as a scorecard, right? In business, we use money as a scorecard, how profitable our business was last quarter or last year. And we can tell how well or how poorly we did. Many times, businessmen or businesswomen, we also will use money as a scorecard to see how well we did last year, or how well we're doing overall, or if we have business savvy or if we don't. Many times, today, and even the Pharisees in this passage, they would use money as a scorecard to how well they were doing with God. You see, the Pharisees believe that if you're rich, you've been blessed by God. If you're poor, you've somehow been cursed. If you're struggling to make things meet, it meant you had somehow angered God. Or if you were extremely wealthy, it meant you were walking very closely with God. And many people, we still believe that somewhat today, don't we? Like, if I'm blessed, it's because God is, He's given me these things. Now, we know from all of the Bible that wasn't the case. Jesus himself was poor, right? And we know no one walked closer with God than Jesus. So if that was their understanding, and our understanding today, if we see that, if we're rich, we're good with God, if we're poor, we're bad with God, if we see that, Jesus is introducing a radically new idea for us. A radically new idea. Now, we know from parts of the Bible, in fact, we even taught last week on Malachi chapter 3, and there God says, look, bring me the full tithe and the contributions, and see if I won't pour out a blessing for you until there's no more need. From other parts of the Bible, we see that as we trust God with our finances, as we give generously, God's going to give back to us, and God's going to bless us. And many times, and we see this from the Bible, and I can even speak to it from my personal experience, that many times when we trust God with our money, God's going to bless us even in the form of money. He'll give us more to be trusted with. So we know that God will bless us with more money, or He very well may bless us with more money as we trust Him. But hoarding it for ourselves, spending it all on ourselves, that was never the point. You see, if we would have started in verse 1 of the same chapter, Luke 16, we would see Jesus is telling us the parable of the dishonest manager. And the dishonest manager, he used everything he had in this life on himself. Everything he had, he used it on himself. And Jesus is contrasting that by saying, no. That's not, as followers of me, we need to leverage everything we can on these true riches. So what were the true riches? What are true riches? What are the true riches Jesus is talking about here? Verse 9, Jesus is telling us that true riches is having people welcome us into their eternal homes, eternal dwellings. What does that mean, right? What does it mean for someone to welcome us into their eternal homes? That's what Jesus is saying. Now, from other things Jesus has said and from other places in the New Testament, we know that for people to welcome us into their eternal home, a few things have to happen, right? This person who's welcomed us into their eternal home, they have to be spending eternity with Jesus. We know that from the Scriptures. And the only way someone's going to be spending eternity with Jesus is if they hear, if they understand and accept the gospel message, Jesus' testimony of Himself and of God. We know that. And so what Jesus is saying here is like, look, as followers of me, we need to spend all we can to help other people to know, to hear, to understand the gospel message. That is the true riches. And He's contrasting that with this parable of the dishonest manager who spent everything on himself. Can we show a picture of my old Power Ranger sword? Just so you guys know, I found this on the internet. I don't actually still own this toy today. Anybody else own the Dragon Dagger? Oh, man, we got somebody. Man, okay, great. Now, when I was younger, when I was 9, let me clarify, not a few years ago. When I was 9, I was at the store and I saw the Dragon Dagger. I knew I had to have it and I didn't care what it was going to take. I had to have this toy. But it was $20. $20 is a lot for a 9-year-old. And I didn't have any money saved up. I didn't have anything in my pocket. And so I did what any rational 9-year-old would do, right? I went and spoke with my local lender. A mom immediately said no. She's like, no, you're not giving you $20 for that toy. So I knew if I wanted that toy, I was going to have to do it the old-fashioned way. I was going to have to save up for it, right? Now, at that time, I was getting $2 a week in allowance. And as a 9-year-old, my math skills was just beginning to bud. But I knew that was going to take a long time. From $2 to $20, a long time. But I set out to do it. I set out to save a fortune. The $20. And it was going to take an eternity. 10 weeks, right? And I did it, and I got that toy. And I played with that toy for 9 days before moving on to something else. You know what? Yeah, we're laughing because we've been there, haven't we? I still remember this story. I still remember the dragon dagger. In fact, I was actually a little surprised I was able to remember what it was called. Kind of embarrassing. But I remember that as an adult. That, we still buy toys as adults, don't we? We still have toys as adults. And maybe we play with them for 9 days, or maybe we play with them for a few months, or maybe a few years if it's a really good toy. But you don't have to play this scenario out too many times as a child or as an adult before I began to realize that, you know what? Maybe God blessed me with the resources He's given me for something more than just toys. Maybe the money God's given me, maybe He was calling me to use it on something more than just toys. Something that was going to last more than just 9 days, right? Or a few weeks or a few months. Maybe He was calling me for something more. And here in Luke 16, Jesus is spelling it out for us. He is calling us to spend our money on something more. He's calling us to spend our money on true riches. As much of it as possible, right? This brings me to the second point I want to make today, is that we're God's stewards. Now, what is a steward? Right? Does anybody know what a steward is? A steward, a great modern day example would be as if we, let's say, went down to Market Street, not far from here, and we went to one of these financial management offices and we went and spoke to somebody. We said, listen, here are the resources. Here's the money that I have, my investments and savings. And here are the objectives I have. I'm wanting to retire at a certain age, or I'm wanting to save for my children's college, or whatever your situation may be. And I want you to do the best you can to help me get to my goals. That would be a classic example of someone who is stewarding our account for us, or someone who is managing our account. Read with me verse 10. Who is faithful in a very little is also faithful in much. And the one who is dishonest in a very little is also dishonest in much. Why did Jesus throw in the word be faithful there? Why did He say be faithful? I mean, what decisions do we actually have to make? You know, Pastor Ben will from time to time quote one of his former pastors, and he say that the easiest decisions in life are those that are already made for us. Right? That's true, right? Would we agree with that? The easiest decisions in life are those that are already made for us. Now, as someone who's been married for a few years, I'm beginning to realize that the easiest decisions in life are those that my wife has already made for me. Can I get an amen? Anybody in that same boat? Yes. No, I'm just kidding. But look, we do have decisions to make. As God's stewards, we have the freedom to spend that money however we see fit. We have the decision to spend that money however we see fit. We can spend it on things for ourselves, and we can spend it on things for God's purposes. And it's a continuum, right? On how much we spend on which category there. What are ways that we can spend money on God's purposes? Have you ever asked yourself that? Like if I do, let's say I do want to be strategic with my money. If I do want to go for the true riches, as Jesus said, what are ways that I can spend my money on things for God's purposes? You know, there are all types of selfless ways, on ways that we can spend our money to help people understand, for people to hear and to know the gospel, ways that we can live it out ourselves in our communities. You know, we can find all sorts of selfless ways to spend our money. That begs to a watching world. What compels those people to spend their money in that way? Why are they spending their money to help other people? Why, as Epic Church, as we support Bessie Carmichael Elementary School, and as we support Kampala, Uganda, our church there, a church that we support there, as we support a woman's place here, what compels us to spend our resources that way? What compels us? Why not spend it on ourselves? Why spend it there? Well, I can answer for me. What compels me is that I understand God has made me a steward of everything He's blessed me with. And I want to use it on as many things as I can that are these true riches. I want to minimize what I spend on these temporary things. I want to maximize what I can spend on these things that are going to last for eternity, these true riches. You know, when I became a Christian, I learned what true joy was. I learned about faith, and I learned about forgiveness and so many different things. So many things that have made me who I am today and have changed my life, and things that I would never go back to. And I want others to have that. I want other people to know about the truth of Jesus. I want other people to know the hope of Jesus. That's what compels me to spend my money on as many things as I can for these true riches, for these things that Jesus describes as the true riches. Now, as good stewards, we're going to have to spend most of what we make, most of the time, right, on temporary things, right? Just on eating and living, the necessities of life. Many of us are going to have to spend the money that we have on the temporary things. Even like, can we get a picture of something maybe someone has spent their money on? Anybody spend your money on these things? Anybody have the precursor to the Zach Morris cell phone? Anybody remember that? Listen, but we need it. These things serve a purpose. These things helped us. They helped us communicate with people. They helped us with our businesses. These things served a purpose, but they were temporary. What about this next thing? Anybody ever have one of these? You buy it. It helps us with our business. It helps us manage our house, whatever you use yours for. But within a few years, it was like a dinosaur bone. It was good for nothing but looking at. Maybe put it in a museum, right? Look, as good stewards, we're going to have to spend a lot of what we make, most of what we make for most of us, on the temporary things. But what I want to challenge you today, and what Jesus is calling us to, is to spend as much as we can to leverage what we do have on the things that are going to be eternal, the things that are going to last forever. You know, I'm convinced that as our life here on earth draws to an end, as we enter eternity, each one of us, I'm convinced that I will be incredibly uninterested in the toys that I had, right? The cars and the houses and the dragon daggers that I had in life. And I'm going to be incredibly interested in the people that I loved, and what I was able to invest in the true riches, and the ways I was able to help other people. I'm convinced that's what Jesus is calling us to here. Jesus is calling us something that's going to last forever, not just our earthly life here. Third point I want to talk about today is the decisions we make in this life matter. The decisions we make in this life, they matter. Read with me verses 12 and 13. And if you have not been faithful in that which is another's, who will give you that which is your own? No servant can serve two masters, for he will hate the one and love the other, or he'll be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. Look, there's a lot at stake. And Jesus, these words he just told us here in verses 12 and 13, they're convicting. That's a bold message, that you cannot be serving at the same time both God and money. You're going to have to pick one. We have to ask ourselves, which one are we serving? Which one are we serving? You know, the choices we make, they do matter. The choices we do make, they matter. If we decide that, we're going to leverage all we have to help out with the eternal things, right? These true riches Jesus is calling us to helping people understand, hear, and hopefully accepting the good news of Jesus. When we make decisions like that, that matters. When we make decisions to spend everything on ourselves, to hoard it, to buy toys for ourselves, that decision also matters. That decision also matters because there's a lot at stake. There's a lot at stake. When becoming a Christian, a lot of things changed for us, didn't they? Right? Some things instantly, some things over time, some things still changing in us, right? Hopefully. Look, things with our relationships, the way we understood in faith and the way we understood joy, the way we lived the life of joy. Those things, as we became Christians, those things all started to change. And the way we see money, and the way we spend our money, the way we budget our money, those things should change as well. Look, there's people all over our world who need people to be investing in the true riches, right? People who need to hear and understand the gospel message. People who need help. People in our communities who need to hear the gospel message. People even in our church who are maybe coming to church for the very first time in their life. Man, we want to help them in any way we can. Maybe even people in our own household, right? Maybe even spouses who they know that people spend their money on what's important to them. And they're watching, they're listening. Listen, this God you talk about, are you investing? Are you giving your money to him, or are you spending on yourself? The decisions we make, they matter. The decisions they make, they matter. And Jesus is calling us to invest as much as we can, to leverage whatever we can on things that are going to last forever, things that are eternal. I want to share with you one very real and very personal reason why Kristen and I, my wife, why we want to leverage all that we can for true riches, is I got to see it fleshed out. Growing up, my father is perhaps the most generous person I've ever met. He was the rocket scientist of the family, quite literally, had a wonderful job, has a wonderful job. And I got to see him really minimize what he spent on these temporary things that we talked about. And he maximized what he was able to give towards things that were going to last forever. And one day, when God placed heavy on our hearts, Kristen and I, to come and be part of this team to start Epic Church. I went to my dad and I told him what God had put on our hearts and asked him if he'd be interested in helping us, helping support us financially. And he was quick to respond, yes, absolutely. And he's blessed us with a tremendous amount of money to help us be out here. And one day after that, I was back at his home, and he and I, we were in the garage. And I just, I had to tell him, Dad, thank you so much for everything you've done for us, to allow us to be out here. Thank you for the sacrifices you've made to let us do what God's called us to do. And I'll never forget what my dad told me. He said, Tim, he said, of course I'm going to help you with this. He said that thankfully that I know Jesus, my children, they know Jesus. But there's children, there's sons and daughters, there's moms and dads, and there's grandmothers and granddaddies and aunts and uncles, brothers and sisters all around the world who don't know Jesus. And if I didn't know Jesus, or if one of my children didn't know Jesus, I would want the church, I would want Christians to be doing everything they could to reach me, to tell me about the good news of Jesus, to tell me about the joy, the love, the peace, the truth of Jesus. I would want the church to do that for me. And that is why my dad minimizes what he spends on temporary things and maximizes on the things that are going to last forever, because he would have wanted somebody to do it for him. You know, as good stewards, we're going to have to spend a lot on ourselves, right? We can't solve the world's problems and neglect our family, right? As a new father, I want to do everything I can that my child Sophia doesn't have holes in her clothes, right? We've not always had a car, but now that we do have a car, I want to be sure that I'm able to provide for a car that when my wife drives it, it's not going to break down on her, right? I want a reliable car for her. As good stewards, we got to take care of our family. We got to take care of our family, right? Most of what we spend our money on is going to be temporary. But what Jesus is calling us to here is to ask ourselves, how can we leverage whatever we have for things that are not temporary, for things that are going to be eternal, for things that are going to last forever? Today, I want you to walk away with three things, right? These things we've already repeated once. Is that Jesus has given us a new perspective on money. That God has made us stewards of all that He's blessed us with. And the decisions we make in this life, they matter. They matter. In just a moment, volunteers are going to be passing out these cards we have. They're called the title, the Tithing Challenge card. Last week we talked about giving our best. This week we're talking about giving strategically. If that's like a new idea for you or something you've been putting off for a while, I want to challenge you to start today. I want to challenge you to start today. For 3 months is what we're challenging people to do. Is just, hey, for 3 months, I'm going to bring God my best. I'm going to try to leverage everything I've got to give to things that are going to last for eternity. And for 3 months, after 3 months, there's no commitment, right? But just for 3 months, a manageable period of time, I want to encourage you. Go ahead and begin passing out the cards. The top box, say, hey, I am taking the tithing challenge. I want to be part of that. I want to begin giving God my best. I want to begin giving strategically. If that's your day, please mark off that box. The second box on there is that, I'm not making any commitments to giving, but I do have questions. I'd like to talk to someone on the leadership team about what the Bible says about giving or your particular situation. We love to help in any way we can. If that's you, mark that second box. The third box is, look, I'm not making any commitments to give, but I would like to know more. And maybe I don't feel comfortable sitting down with someone on the staff at Epic or whatnot, but I would like to read more about it. We've got these books that we're passing out for free in the back this morning called Why I Give. If you were here last week, we also passed them out. It was a book that I've written, and we debuted it last week. I would love to give you one of these for free. I'd love for you to have that. I'd love for you to be challenged by that. And so if you fill out this card, what I'd like to invite you to do is just to put it in the black offering bucket at the end of our service when we have our time of offering. And if you've marked any one of those boxes, I'm going to email you this week. And I just want you to know that, man, I'm praying for you. I'm here available. If you want to talk about it, if you've got questions, I'm here for you. I want to help out in any way I can. Maybe you're here today and you've heard a lot about this, spreading the gospel, about the reason that compels me to give is that I want people to know about the joy, the hope, the love, the truth of Jesus. If you're here today and you're like, man, I don't know about that for myself, but I'd like to know more. On that envelope, that communication card that Lindsay talked about at the very beginning of the series, right on there somewhere. Man, I've got questions about Jesus. Or if you're like Tim, I'm in. I've been thinking about this. I've been praying about it. I know I want to follow Jesus. If that's you, mark on that box, become a follower of Jesus. We're going to contact you this week. We want you to know that, hey, we want to come alongside you. We want to help you explore your faith, if that's you. We want to help you grow in your faith. if that's you. Finally, just going to repeat it one more time, because if you only remember one thing, I want it to be this: that Jesus has given us a new perspective on our money. We are stewards for what God has blessed us with.